Okay, before we start, I got...
Let me introduce you.
Oh, okay.
Jim Foster. The great 1982 Duluth East team. So Jim played with that great team, and they had a run of, how many times did you get to the state tournament?
3 years in a row.
So it was 80, 81, 82.
Yep.
And so Jim played on that Greyhound squad. So what do you got for me?
My question is, what do the Lynch boys have against Duluth? Because John and Tim beat us in 82.
Here we go.
And you beat Central in 86, and you beat East in the semis in 87.
You're forgetting one.
Well, which one am I forgetting?
85, we beat Duluth Central in the third place game.
Ah, see?
I know. You know what's funny? You bring that up is when I did the radio for the Timberwolves back in 2008, 2009 season. So we had this little radio caravan thing. We went around the state of Minnesota before that season started for the Wolves, and we stopped in all sorts of cities around Minnesota, and we stopped in Duluth, and we had this little studio set up in one of the bars downtown in Duluth, and there's like some, so it wasn't a whole lot of people there, but we're just kind of promoting the Timberwolves that season, and we're the radio guys, And there's a few, like, probably diehard Duluth sports fans that are hanging out in these bars every day, and they see me come walking in, and they start harassing me. It's like, they said the same thing. What do you have against Duluth?
Yeah.
Because you did some damage against our teams back in the day, so that's pretty fun.
That was a fun rivalry, though.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no animosity there. You guys were great, and it was fun to play in.
Oh yeah. All right, Jim. So let's just go back in time. We'll start a little bit before we get into the games of. Well, wait a minute. Let me say this: 81, and you guys beat Jefferson in the consolation
Which is the
round.
worst? Which is the worst thing in the world when you're playing on? We both played the evening round. You guys.
The night before.
Lost to Anoka. We lost to St. Paul Central. And you have to get up at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning and go to McAllister, where you get 12 people in the crowd. There's more than that, but 12 people in the crowd, and you got to try to play a game after your dreams have been crushed. That was hard.
So let's look up the score since we're having fun and talking about this, because we'll have that 80-81.
I could flash my nerdism and tell you what the score was.
What was it?
56-37.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, they so then those two teams play in the state title game the year later, and Jefferson turns that around and wins a close game. But yeah, you guys kind of hammered us. What do you remember about that game? That consolation? Anything?
I just it was a kind of a slow build, but I remember we kind of pulled away at the end and enough so that I was able to get in, which I appreciated. Because Brad wasn't going to play. I was the backup center, and we played the same position. I wasn't a wing or a forward. I was a back to the basket center, just like him. And obviously, he's a two-time All-State center, so I didn't play much. Okay. Unless he was hurt or whatever.
Right. All right. So let's go back in time a little bit. When you were a kid, Duluth. People think of Duluth a lot of times, I think, as a real hockey town.
It is a hockey town.
And it is a hockey town. Obviously, the Bulldogs are winning national championships, all that kind of stuff, right? But there's been a ton of great basketball talent that have come through those high schools, and the teams were great, even back in the 60s into the 70s with Central's teams.
Central won.
And then you guys with
times.
Brian Hansen was a Mr. Basketball finalist. He went to the U for a couple of years.
Yep.
The Dudek boys and your teams in the early 80s. So
Dave Zoller played against you.
Dave Zoller,
87,
exactly. Pete Anderson was a Mr. Basketball finalist.
Pete Anderson, of course, Rick Rickert played in 2001, and Corey Johnson, who went to Iowa State, played in 2006.
Yeah, Corey Johnson, that's right. I remember him. So talk about the basketball hotbed that is the city of Duluth back in those days.
I think it largely was due to about the time I was in fourth grade, which would have been 74 maybe. They started a youth program, and each elementary school had teams, 2 or 3 or 4 teams, and we played each other, and that kind of built the pool of talented players. And then, like the Dudek brothers went to Rock Ridge Elementary. I went to Lakeside. So we played against each other until 7th grade. And then half of the Woodland kids, they split between Duluth Central and Duluth East. So we had like Gary Madison in 1979. He was on that Duluth Central championship team. He went to Woodland, could have went to East, but I believe he lived right on the borderline. He could have went either way, and he went to Central because I guess his friends went there, so he decided to go there too.
Plus, that program was great in the late 70s.
Oh, they were fabulous. They were
Greg Downey?
Yep, they were our main competition. We split with them the year they won the title in '79. We won the first game, they won the second. We were looking forward to maybe getting another shot at them, and then we lost to Hibbing in the region finals, which kind of set the impetus for that run of 3 state tournaments, because we had lost 2 heartbreakers in a row where we had a big lead and lost it and lost the game. So in 1980, we played them again in the regions, and it was 6-4. We were playing at the Duluth Arena. It was 6-4. The next time Hibbing scored, it was 22-4, and we just kept pounding them. And it was 38-12 at the half. And people would come in. I heard this later. People came in and looked at the scoreboard and thought the scoreboard was malfunctioning. And so we're in the locker room. Brian Hansen is there, and he is screaming at us, "Don't let up! Don't let up!" Because he had been through 2 horrible, terrible losses. So he's just screaming, "Don't let up! Don't let up!" And we managed to blow them out, and that was fun. And we didn't lose to them again for 3 or 4 years. So.
Yeah, talk about the great players at Central. I mean, obviously Downing, they had size too.
Greg Downing,
Michaud, the brothers, is that
the Dan and Randy Michaud? They were
Michaud.
Randy was like 6'9" and Dan was 6'7". They had Gary Madison, who was just a tremendous player. And of course, Downing, who went to Nebraska, and they had a super sub named Kevin Beekler, who was, you could always count on Kevin to make something happen, and he was a great reserve for them.
So did you grow up playing against those guys? I mean, did all the Duluth guys in youth basketball play against each other constantly, or with each other?
Somewhat in the youth leagues, because like I say, Woodland had a team. Woodland had some youth teams, and Ordine had some youth teams, and Washington had some youth teams, and we would play in the City League too. So the Washington junior high guys went to Central, so we had kind of a rivalry there and whatnot. So it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of good competition within the city, and we had some good competition around. But the big problem with us was you had to travel to get competition, and we had a lot of A schools in our conference. And generally, you can, just on mere talent alone, you can usually beat them. I mean, they play hard and they're good athletes and stuff like that, but a Silver Bay can't compete with us because we had 5 times as many players and bigger players and stuff like that. So our schedule, they made an effort in 1982 to make it tougher. And the big thing was we played Chaska in the preliminary game to a Gophers Indiana game.
They used to do that, that's right.
And so that was fun, and we were down right away at halftime, and Coach St. John, Irv St. John was our coach. He came in and he got in Brad's face, and I always thought this was one of Irv's best coaching jobs, because he wasn't a yeller. He got in Brad's face because Brad had committed to Iowa State, and he said, "Do you think they play like this in the Big 8, which was back then? Do you think they play like this?" And Brad got mad, and when Brad got mad, good things were going to happen for us, because I know that because in practice he'd get mad at me because I guarded him, and And so we came back and won that game, and that was huge for us because we'd come down to the cities and would play differently than we played up north. It was, all of a sudden we're playing a team that's as good as us, and other than like a Hibbing or a Central, which we knew were as good as us. But it was hard to get up in the same way for those games because it's hard when you're going against somebody who's just as good as you are, and then you make a mistake, it's gonna cost you. We could make mistakes against Hermantown back then and get away with it, but you can't do that against teams down here. So that preliminary game played a big role in our run in the 82 state tournament.
Right. Well, you beat them in that preliminary game.
We came back and beat them in that preliminary game by 1.
Right.
And then we played them again in the semifinals. We beat Austin, we beat Stillwater. They beat Austin. And then after we played Stillwater in the afternoon. We came and we were in our hotel room watching Jefferson beat Minneapolis North, and we were all going crazy because you guys upset Minneapolis North, and that was so much fun to watch. And then we had to play Chaska, and we were up 6 with about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. They came back and tied it. We went to the first overtime. I just kind of traded baskets. Second overtime, we're down by 4 with 30 seconds left. And I can remember sitting there, and I was looking across, and the Jefferson kids, The Jefferson crowd was right across from our bench. I just remember sitting there going, oh, yeah, I really don't want to play for third place. And we came back, and Brad made a tip in at the buzzer. We tied them again. We outscored them in the third overtime and finally won the game. And it was pandemonium. It was just crazy. I remember running into the locker room and jumping around and going nuts. And eventually we came back out and watched you guys play St. Cloud Tech. But, our minds were gone at that point. We were so excited to be playing for the title.
That's pretty impressive to beat. I mean, that Chaska team was good. They had size. Dalkey was obviously a good player.
Dalkey,
going to
Price.
Minnesota. Chuck Price was a good
Al
player.
Listman was a great player. They had some really good guys. A few years later, when I was working at the Trib, I had to call Dennis Welter, who was the coach at Chaska, about some story. And at the end, I said, Coach, I just wanted to let you know I played on that Duluth East team in '82, and the phone got silent because they lost 2 games that year to us by a total of 3 points. Those 2 losses were by 3 points. So I'm sure he didn't appreciate that, but I had to do it.
All right, so let me throw out some of your teammates. Let me give you their name and tell me about them as a player.
Okay.
Let's start, and I don't know if Norlander, Paul Norlander?
Paul Norlander,
Okay.
great ball handler, underrated scorer. He was our floor general. If we get in more into the championship game, he was the guy who was guarding Greg Montbriand.
Right.
But yeah, he was a good, steady influence. Could score, but wasn't asked to a lot because our offense was basically get it into Brad and Brian.
Right.
But certainly he could shoot, he could play. He was the next year after we all graduated. He and Dan Jaworski were the stars, but Jaworski blew out his knee, and so basically it was Paul carrying them all the way to the regional final when they lost to Chisago Lakes, and they had Keith Hasselquist,
Yeah, that's
who was
right.
a really good player.
Dan Jaworski.
Good scorer, great player. He moved from Oregon my junior year. He moved in from Oregon. His dad was in the Air Force, I think it was. I'm not sure about that, but he came and he looked at schools, and he saw he went up to UMD to play summer league, and he saw us big guys at Easton and decided, I want to go there. So he went there and he played quite a bit as a sophomore, which was not odd, but there was a 81 team had a lot of senior guards and stuff, but he still played, and then he would be our shooting guard. Norlander was our point guard, and
Right.
Dan was more of our shooting guard, and he was a great scorer.
Tom Fleck.
Tom Fleck was he and I and Brad and Brian Dudek were the 3 guys who were on all 3 state tournament teams, and he worked his way up into a starting role as a senior, underrated as a player because he could score, but he wasn't asked to, and he had. I remember in a big game against Hibbing, he had 12 points in a huge role, and I was looking it up in the championship game, he had 4 points in the third quarter when our offense was kind of bogging down, and obviously he was getting open and taking shots and stuff. So, just a good, very good player, good scorer. I kind of feel sorry for the guards and the other forward, as Tom was the other forward, because our offense was designated to get the ball into Brad and Brian, and so they could score. They were never asked to. So when they did, it was a bonus.
Brian Dudek.
Brian was a great player. Could jump, could run, could shoot. He had a little flair to him. The Chaska game in the third overtime, he got the tip, went in and dunked the ball, which kind of reminds me of you.
Back in those days, not a lot of guys were dunking.
Yeah, and I remember thinking when he was going in, I could tell he was going to do it, and I thought, no, yeah, way to go, because I was just worried that he might not make it, but he did. And he was also our defensive stopper, so he guarded Dalkey, he guarded John in the final. I mean, he had the double duty of guarding their best forwards or best offensive players. We didn't always play zone. We played some zone, but we didn't always play zone, and Brian was our key defensive guy for the big scores.
Okay, Brad Dudek.
Brad is an amazing player, and we battled from 7th grade on, and I always seemed to have to guard him in practice, which was no fun for me, but he got it. It was nice that he could get on the 80 team. He was a sophomore with a bunch of seniors, so he could break in nicely, but he was, very good, and he just kept getting better and better. I think he averaged 23 points a game as a junior, and he kind of came back a little bit as a senior because he didn't have to score that much, but he had a double-double in the championship game, and the game that I remember most about him was he had committed to Iowa State. We went up to Hibbing to play, and they were a big rival for us, and he had 39 points when Johnny Orr was there. He was like 18 of 20 from the field. It was just incredible, and we won by 2 points, and it was just a huge game. But it was impossible to guard him. We read all the stories about teams using tennis rackets to try to standing on chairs.
Jefferson did that before the title game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just to get a feel for it. And he told me once that he remembered one game where he had 11 block shots. Very even tempered. I mean, he didn't foul out hardly ever. I don't even remember if he did foul out. Sometimes as a guy who backs him up, you kind of say, I sure hope he'd foul out so I could get in.
Yeah.
He never did.
Nothing wrong with thinking like that when you're 17
he
or
never
18.
did.
Let me say this about Brad Dudek. And it's too bad. I wish he would have come down here. I'd like to meet him, but 7-footer. And watching the game this morning to kind of get ready for this, here's a guy that big. He could move, like you said, he moved really well for a guy that size. He was agile, which is important. He had really good touch. You could see that just watching the game. Now, I don't know if I recognized that so much when I was a little kid watching the game live, and he also seemed like, and Brian had a little bit of this, had a little bit of a streak to him. I mean, he's mild-mannered like a lot of those 7-foot guys or 6'10" guys, but it always helps if they have a little bit of you can get kind of pissed off at times. And it seemed like Brian was like that too, but Brad had some of that.
Brian was more emotional, more outwardly emotional. Brad, you had to get him warmed up, but when he got warmed up, it was tough. I mean, he'd get worked up, and practice battles were great. His favorite move was to let me get in front of him, and then he'd hook his arm around my shoulder and just go like that, and I'd go flying, and he'd score. And